introducing the Comprehensive Plan Update Committee members that are here. And I'm going back and forth across. Bill Kish. Bill Kish, the Planning Board. John Credell, retired town justice. Diane Engelke, head of the CAC. Mimi Ramos, real estate broker, business person, and none. Then we have Ed Downey in the back. And I actually think that's I'm Edie Greenwood, and of course John Midwood, who is manning the camera and tells me that when Nan is giving her presentation, it would be good not to be talking to each other because his audio isn't quite as good as it is in Town Hall. So, because we are going to broadcast this on the website, under the videos. And I don't think I've forgotten anybody. So, Nan Stolzenberg has been our consultant. We have been blessed. She's helped us sort of gather our thoughts, and I'm very pleased at the organization she has brought to the process. And part of what she's going to talk about is the process and the organization. There's a heck of a lot of information, but making it as organized as I hope you find it will make it much more accessible, the parts that you care about. Nan, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks for coming out on a Saturday to learn about the draft comprehensive plan. I really appreciate it. And so my part today really is to give you an overview of the document, and how it came to be, and a little bit of background about it, so you can walk away today if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, or even if you have looked at it, maybe you'll have some better feeling for what it's all about and why we went through all of this and how it can be used. So I'm going to just go through kind of a tour, like a comprehensive plan 101, so that you can understand it. There's really three parts to the document. Part one is the meat of the document that includes the critical pieces of the plan, such as the vision, the goals of your community, and the strategies. So if you have only a little bit of time to thumb through things and you want to get a feel for what's being recommended, what's the direction that the plan establishes for the town, part one is where you want to put your time. And I'm going to go into a little more detail about what those pieces are. Part two is an appendix, and you can kind of think of it as the background information. A comprehensive plan is based on something in the community. It's based on public input, it's based on factual information like census data, map data, and other information we've collected about the resources in the community. And all of that is documented in a fairly lengthy part two appendix. So that, if you're reading through part one and you see something about the public indicated or part of public presentation or part of public input said XYZ, you will find all of that information in the appendix. And then the third piece is a reference document that I don't think is quite all together yet. And that is throughout the process, the committee has referred to a lot of other planning work that's been done and a lot of other studies, maps, and information that goes back many years. And we discovered, as is pretty common in lots of places that I go to, is that it's easy to lose sight of things that were done 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago. And so this was an opportunity to put all of that body of work together in a reference document so that over time you will all have the benefit of many years of planning and studying and information about the town to support the decisions that hopefully the town and village will be making in the future. So that's kind of a broad overview overview. The plan also contains, again, if you are going to really focus your time on looking at something, one of the important things is what we call an action plan. And the action plan is a summary of the recommended strategies that are in more detail in the body of part 1. So the action plan, you can kind of think of it as a checklist. So this plan is being developed. The owner of the plans are really the town and the village boards. They are the owner and the keeper of this document. And it's up to them over time to hopefully implement the different strategies and ideas that come up with the plan. This action table that's at the back is kind of that checklist and that summary sheet of priorities of what the plan recommends. So take a look at that as well. That's an important component of it. So a comprehensive plan, let's go back and make sure everybody is on the same page about what a comprehensive plan is in the first place. So first of all, New York State town and village law authorizes towns and villages to write comprehensive plans. The state puts a lot of emphasis on a comprehensive plan. If you look back at court cases and legal documents and other laws, you'll see that the comprehensive plan is viewed as a really important statement of what the community has to say for itself. In other states, comprehensive plans are required. The state requires local communities to have comprehensive plans, and they often require certain things to be discussed. In New York State, that's not how it is. It's kind of voluntary, although it's like a really important voluntary. Because the state then goes on to say that if you have land use regulations like zoning, or site plan, or subdivision, that they must be related to a plan. Because the laws implement something of importance to the community, and the things that are important are talked about in the comprehensive plan. So you can kind of think about the comprehensive plan as a big policy direction to guide future decision making. I like to say that everything that you will look at in the plan is oriented somewhere along the line to answering these 3 questions. And these are kind of the basics of any planning process, whether it's an update to a plan, a new plan, an open space plan, a pedestrian plan, any of them always start with these 3 questions. And the first one is, what are the current conditions in the town village? What's going on? What are your resources? What are the environmental resources? What are the infrastructure? What are the community resources? What's the demographics? Those are all answered pretty much in Appendix 2. Those are all outlined and say, here we are, here's our town, here's all of our historic resources, here's all our environmental resources. They're all outlined to give you a picture of right now what's going on in town. The next question that the plan asks and answers is, what do you as a community want for yourself in the future? And that is articulated in the vision and the goals. Really, the plans that I work on and that I've worked on for many, many years are heavy and rely on the vision and the goals as really important components, because our ideas of what the zoning should say or what project we're going to fund, all of these things can come and go over time, and we can have arguments about, is it good to do this or is it good to do that? But as a community, I feel very strongly that where we come together is with a common vision for ourselves and a common set of goals. So that is, I think, are really important statements in the comprehensive plan that should stand the test of time. And if you go back to the 1990s plan that was developed, you will see that the vision and the goals that were re-evaluated and re-looked at in 2018 and 2019, for the most part, are pretty similar to the ones that were done in the 1990s. And that we kind of so have revalidated that you as a community kind of hope the town and the village will head in a similar direction. The information that we got for coming up with the vision and the goals is also raw data, the survey and the other things that we did, and you can find that as well in the appendix. And was there any raw information in the reference document?
I think there's even more raw, as in less cooked data than there.
Right, so we have given you, so in 10 or 15 years, when the town and the village will go back and make sure that the plan is updated, hopefully can use all that information. So after we know what's going on now, where do you want to go in the future, then the last question the plan answers is, how do we get there? What can we do as a town board, village board, community, business people, and residents? How can we and what can we do to make that vision and those goals real? So taken all together, these three questions, really put them all together, and that's a comprehensive plan. And I think that the plan is used as a guideline, a roadmap. It's not a law. A comprehensive plan is not adopted like a local law. It's adopted as a plan. It's made to be a living document. It's made to be something that hopefully everyone in the community will use, and when they're making a decision, the town board is making a decision about whatever, it will ask itself, if we make this decision, will it get us closer to our ideals as laid out in the comprehensive plan or not? So it's kind of like the guidepost, I think the roadmap is a good analogy, is that if you don't know where you're going to go, you could drive in your car forever and around and not get to any place. The comprehensive plan is that map to help you know what you want at the end and what some of those mileposts are to get there. So the public input is really, we put a lot of effort. We start off, and I'd have to go back and count the number of meetings and months that the committee spent working on how to hear what the public has to say. And a really, really important, it's the critical component, because the plan has to reflect you all as a community. It can't be what I bring to the table or what I think Northeast should be, it's what you all think it should be. And so to get at that, we had multiple layers of public input. We had monthly committee meetings that were open to the public, in which many times there were members of the public that were there and came and spoke and asked questions. The committee spent weeks, if not months, doing interviews and focus groups with various organizations and individuals and agencies in the town and the region to hear what they had to say about the community and its challenges and its opportunities. We did a public workshop in the Lions Club Rotary. Legion, okay, in the Legion Hall, where we had 75 people come, where we analyzed and talked about what the strengths and the weaknesses and the vision for the town are. So that gets added into it. And then we also had a town-wide and village-wide survey where we built on all of those other efforts to kind of drill down and hear more about what people were interested and concerned about and ideas that they had. While that was going on, kind of behind the scenes was a lot of data collection. And that included an inventory and a description and mapping of natural resources. Some of the maps that you will see in the plan have been around for a while. They're not new maps. Some of them are new maps using updated information. You know, things like soils don't change, so we had like the town's agricultural and farmland protection plan had some mapping done showing those kinds of agricultural resources. So we tried not to reinvent the wheel, use maps and information that were still valid from other efforts, but update new maps where we needed to have new information, or some things have changed, like parcel lines change frequently, and those need to be updated. And these you'll see mostly in the appendix 2, the part 2. An inventory and description of community and cultural resources. There's everything from the historic resources to a discussion of the town and the village, highway departments, and cultural resources, businesses, and other things that are all kind of outlined. Because what we want is, especially in a community that wants to do some economic revitalization and economic work, is that part 2. You should be able to give a prospective business person, entrepreneur who says, hey, I'm interested in Millerton, I'd like to know what's going on. I'm interested in Northeast, maybe I want to build a house here, or maybe I want to put a business in. That part 2 will give them the information that they need to show them, it will be a lot of their homework, to show them what you have going on in your community. So that part 2, I hope won't be a sit on the shelfer, and I hope that it will be used and heralded as, here's who we are, here's what's going on. Inventory and description of economic conditions. Ellen Pemrick, my team member, is an economic development planner, and she did a lot of the data collecting and analysis from the economic perspective of what's going on in town. And you'll find that in part 2 as well. And then an inventory and description of infrastructure. We have incorporated a lot of the information from the Village of Millerton's pedestrian plan that is incorporated into the plan. So you'll see traffic counts, and information on roads and highways as well in there. So that all that's all part of the planning process, going back to that first question of what's going on in town now. So the planning process partly is that you have all this information that we have to figure out what it's trying to tell us, and what does it mean, and how does it give us direction to know what you all want for your community. And so we put it into this thing called a SWOT. It's one of those planning buzzwords. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's kind of like the organizing principle. So the strengths that we uncover in the planning process are things about your community that you want to keep positive and strong, the things that you highly value and you want to continue them. The weaknesses are issues and areas that you have identified as needing some work. There's an issue about it, or some sort of challenge or barrier that has been posed. The opportunities are, and we had a lot, pages and pages of ideas of what can we do in town, in the village, to make things better and improve them and overcome some of those weaknesses or support those challenges or those strengths. And then the last part of the SWOT is the threats, and those are more difficult. They're usually broader things that are hard for a small community on its own to control. And they're often problems that influence you from outside. Like in the last few years, climate change has been a big problem that is broader than just a town or a village. That is, some communities see that as a threat, but it's not something easily controlled or contained locally because it's bigger than you are. So we took all of the information that we had, we organized it into the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We looked at the 1990s vision and the 1990s goals and said, are they still valid? Do they still sing to you? Do they still resonate with what we learned about the community? And so that is how the vision and goals that outlined in part 1 kind of came to be. And I don't expect you to read this at all. It's in the plan, and you can go and look at part 1 and read it. But I think that Again, I put a lot of weight on a vision statement because it's in one paragraph or two paragraphs. It really should capture the essence of what you want for yourself in the future. And the committee worked hard and long, many meetings on what the words should be, what the tone should be, what we want to say about ourselves. So, it talks about the entrepreneurial spirit, the resource-rich environment that you have here, your commitment to preserving the environment and the landscape that you so love here. Building on the village and the historical and the cultural resources that you have here. Working together, being forward-thinking and finding a way to solve problems. It's some people would say it's, my motherhood and apple pie. Well, yes, it is kind of motherhood and apple pie, but it's your motherhood and apple pie, and it should support what you all want as a community. So I think that's a really important statement that, again, we can argue about, where should there be X, but if we can fall back on, this is who we are as a community, you've come a really long way. I find developing a vision statement and goals is a really important community building, it has a community building role. So, So that's kind of the high level first 6 or 8 months of the project was to collect all this data, do the mapping, figure out what people had to say, and organize it. And then say, okay, now we have a vision and a goal, we know where we want to head. And so now we can get into the nitty-gritty about what do we really have to do? What do we have to say? What strategies and actions do we have to jump into in order to meet those challenges and take advantages of those opportunities? So here's a list of all of the topics that are addressed in the plan. You can see they range from natural beauty and scenic all the way to civic involvement and volunteerism and local government. That's why it's called a comprehensive plan. Back in the early years of planning, the late 60s, 70s, even into the early 80s, they were commonly called master plans. And kind of master plan kind of conveys you have a plot of land and you're going to plan out and figure out where everything goes and what everything is going to look like. But it's not so easy when you get at a town level or a regional level. So planners over the years have gone to comprehensive plan because it comprehensively looks at the issues that are important to a community. So you will see goal statements and strategies related to each of these topics in the plan. The plan is forward-thinking about 10 to 15 years. So we have to kind of put ourselves in where are we going to be and what do we want to see happening in 10 to 15 years. The strategies outlined in this plan are, many of them are simple and easy to do, like updating a web page or creating a community calendar. Others are more complex. They need time, they need money, they need lots of people to be involved. So you'll see that we have that long time span. The strategies are basically 3 broad types of strategies. There's regulatory strategies, like how can we have our zoning work to meet our goals, for instance. Capital improvement projects, sidewalks, roads, parking lots, signage, those are all capital improvements. And then projects, just other kinds of programs and projects that would enhance the kinds of things that you want in the community. I counted roughly, there's about 100 different strategies identified in the plan. It's a lot, I know, it's very involved, very detailed in its breadth of exploring the options available to the community. But the plan recognizes that, we're not going to be undertaking 100 strategies and all at once, and that there's priorities and then the low-hanging fruit that are easy to do, and the more complex priorities that take a little more effort. So those are all identified and organized that way. So I just wanted to briefly, I picked some of those priorities, not all of them, to share with you today. I think you need to read through and skim through those strategy sections in the action table. But some of the short-term strategies were, again, those things that can make a big difference, but are relatively easy to put into place, like creating a unified community calendar, so the town and the village is coordinated with all sorts of other organizations and things going on. So you're not looking at 5 different websites or expecting 10 different newsletters, which no one has the money to read, to develop and put out anymore. Communicating effectively with everybody was a real important theme, and it's a really important theme everywhere I go. That one is at the top of the list in practically every community I go to, which I find very interesting. Some other simpler things, reestablishing the Ag Committee to work on ag-related programs, and the plan identifies a couple other committees that could be formed to help on specific topics and strategies. Hosting an annual town hall, village hall meeting where we get everybody together on an annual basis and say, where are we? How's things going? What's on your mind? What's come up in the last year? Maybe there's what we thought was not a priority in 2019, in 2021 will become a priority for some reason. So the plan is meant to work for you on a year-to-year basis. Don't wait 15 years and pick it up. Oh, we have a comprehensive plan. We haven't looked at it in 15 years. That's not the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to use it to help you get the things done in town and village that you need. So having an annual town and village hall meeting is always a good idea to share ideas with your elected officials and with each other. Developing a townwide email list so that we can send out, oh, we're having a meeting on such and such. I know I've talked about it in the community. For those of you who might have gotten anything, Ankrum, Art Basson has done a fantastic job of putting together, I don't know, hundreds. He's got like 600 people on his email list, and they love it. I think it's worked really effectively for them. You know, then you might not choose that you're interested in going to a meeting or an event, but at least you've been notified easily. You can ignore it, but it's there. And then continue to support community-based nonprofit organizations, which in our Appendix 2, there's a lot of them. They're doing great work. They're a really important fabric of the community, and that needs to be continued to be recognized, and support them in ways as we can. In terms of some longer-term strategies that were a priority, installing public sewers has been a priority from the very beginning of the project. Sidewalk improvements in the village, ongoing improvements to complete at Eddie Collins Park, planning for 5G wireless. I don't know ultimately when and how that's going to be, but I know in other communities that's moved up to the forefront. Even a year ago, it was like, not that big of a deal. And now all of a sudden 5G has become much more of an issue where communities are, in waking up and finding new poles with generator-sized boxes on the poles in their yards because the companies have come in and put them up. So it's getting to be more of an issue. Updating zoning and subdivision. Your zoning and subdivision laws are in place to meet some sort of community goal. They're not there to just regulate land for the sake of regulating land. They're there to help get your community meet some sort of purpose and goal. And the plan, I think, spends a lot of time articulating what those are. So updating the zoning and subdivision laws in both the town and the village was a priority. Developing a comprehensive parking program in the village to encourage economic development and bringing folks to keep the village vital. Parking had a lot to do that. And implementing climate smart projects was also felt to be a priority. So those were some of the highlights of what's on that action list for long-term work. I have just a few slides of just some other things that may not have risen to the very top of we have to get done now, but they're important nonetheless. Things like better signage, so to direct people to different places and parking areas, especially in the village area, was felt to be important. Creating bike lanes, walkability and linkages, especially in the village, came out is a really important goal. Creating marketing and promotion. You can't have enough marketing and promotion. It's a really important part of economic development. And we as a community in upstate New York, every community has to do a better job of promoting and marketing itself. We just have to find ways to do that on multiple levels. And the plan offers a whole page, a page and a half or maybe more of economic development program ideas that can be put to work by various organizations and entities to find folks to invest and come and continue to make the place a really vital place. Developing a 5-year capital improvement plan. A capital improvement plan is a really important planning tool where you say, let's take the sidewalks in the village. We know that we have X amount of places that need a sidewalk. We're going to budget over 5 years for them. We're going to need X amount of money, X amount of staff or equipment to build those sidewalks. And so having a 5-year kind of rolling plan where you look out and you say, well, within 5 years we're going to accomplish this, and here's how we're going to get the money to do that. You do the work, it gets crossed off the list, and the next thing moves up. It can be a very effective tool for you. Developing a complete streets program. A complete street program would build on the pedestrian plan, but look at street landscapes, would look at lighting, would look at signage, and kind of put the whole complete street together to be effective parts of your community. They're already great, but the complete streets programs have been very successful in other small communities to build on that. Updating a historic inventory. Historic resources are really important to you guys, and you want to make sure you know that history, you share that history, and you keep it up to date. Inventorying and mapping important view sheds came up. That's really at the town level, and that is also a community-based, what I think might be an important view, might not be what you think is an important view. So it's a community-based effort to say, here's our really great views that we would like to promote or protect or do something with over time. So that's on the list. Doing a feasibility study to see if there's a need for a shared community kitchen. I think that might have been grown from the ag plan, but that was one of the, another set of strategies. So as I mentioned, there are, the plan puts a lot of detail into areas where the regulatory piece of the puzzle can be improved. That's your zoning, site plan, and subdivision laws, basically. So there's way more in here that I can summarize in a couple slides. But I've kind of split the changes that the plan recommends for the regulatory arm of the strategies into a couple different ways. Process, the first one. And that's basically, how is the law working? Does it have clear definitions? Does it have clear purpose statements? Are the purpose statements of the zoning law, do they now match what your comprehensive plan says? Do you have the right administrative procedures to make projects that come to the planning boards understandable and efficient? So those are all recommendations that you'll see in various sections of the plan. One of the things I also recommended was this a modified site plan review for certain agricultural uses. Some agricultural uses that have a lot of cars coming, like ag tourism kind of things, is really a different kind of agriculture than a dairy farm, for instance. So we want to be aware that we can't step too far onto the toes of farms that are in the New York State Agricultural District, but there are certain situations when the town might want a little more review. So this modified site plan review is kind of a middle of the road, gives the town the ability to do some review, but not overstep where we shouldn't overstep into the ag and markets law. The next one is, so we have process, and then the next one is some development standards. And there are a lot of development standards that have already existing that are kind of involved in the town but not really memorialized yet, such as the Greenway Guides. They're wonderful tools and they should be more front and center so everybody knows what those recommendations are and what they look. They have really great illustrations. The habitat study that was done a couple of years ago also has some regulatory recommendations on how some of the most valuable environmental features in the town could be promoted and protected. Something like when there's a new development in the village to require sidewalks, if they're going to tear the sidewalks out for construction, that they get put back, to clearly articulate what those expectations for development are. Parking lots and landscaping standards, and then the last two, the inclusionary zoning is an idea that promotes, has been used in, I think the closest one that I know of that's used it is Pine Plains. It basically says if you have a large development that comes in, we're talking about a major development, that an inclusionary zoning component is that a certain percentage, the zoning would establish that a certain percentage of those new homes or units that are built would be done so and sold at an affordable level. It's a way to get at some of the affordable housing issues in a community. And it uses the what's affordable here, not necessarily what's affordable in another community. So it's tailor-made to what you have there. But that's an idea that's promoted. Whether the boards will ever memorialize that into the zoning, that will be up to you, but the idea is floated in the plan, as is using more traditional neighborhood design standards in the village to make sure that what development comes into the village has similar setbacks, similar lot sizes, similar style, so that new development is consistent with the things you want to promote. And in some cases, the zoning either doesn't articulate that or actually has standards that don't match. So we want to make sure that what comes into the village new is consistent with what you have. Some other things that are in that section are to update some of the development standards for the Boulevard District to bring that into its original, the vision for that area. Adding illustrated designs, that's something that is really important. There's no reason why a zoning law can't have pictures in it or can't have illustrations in it, and it's way easier for people to say, oh, this is what you mean by this standard. So at some point, if the town and village can work on illustrated guidelines that could go either as an addendum or in the zoning, could be hugely helpful to move, so everyone is like, oh, I get it, that's what you're looking for. Conservation subdivisions is a technique, again, where you have a major subdivision, usually out at the town level, not necessarily in the village level, where you allow the development to take place, but it's done with the eye towards preserving as much of the open space on that parcel as possible, so that you can continue to have agriculture or you can more effectively protect environmental resources. Farm-friendly standards comes from the Agricultural and Farmland Protection Plan. We don't want the zoning to put barriers up for farming. And making sure that the overlay district that you already have here in both the town and the village is working to protect the resources, the streams and the streams, the riparian zones along the streams. So those are some of them. And then the last category is that the plan talks about is let's make sure the uses and the dimensions of new stuff that comes to town is what we want. Let's articulate what those are and make sure we have the uses we want to have in the village, in the town, at the scale and the intensity that you want. So that means relooking at those pieces of the zoning and again, making sure they're consistent. So at the end of the day, when something comes in and proposed, you want to be able to say yes easily, instead of saying, no, we don't want you. We want to be able to say, here's the community's expectations, and if you meet those expectations, you'll get a yes at the end. That's what we want to set up. So those are just a really quick tour of some of the strategies that are outlined in the plan. And so where do we go from here? So this is kind of an informal presentation to familiarize yourself with the plan. The next step is the committee will be holding a public hearing on May 18th at 2 o'clock here. And so that will be the formal public hearing. You can come and say whatever, ask questions that could be answered by the committee, hand in writing or accepting written comments as well. So the public hearing is required by state law, and it'll be the first of two. After the committee's public hearing, the committee will decide if they need to make any edits or adjustments to the draft plan. And when they're ready, and they feel they have a final draft document, then they will submit it to the village and the town boards. At that point, the committee's work is basically done, and then the town and the village are, the responsibility for taking over the adoption process is theirs. The only time requirement that is put on the town and the village board is they have to hold a second public hearing within 90 days. They don't have to adopt the plan within 90 days, but they have to hold a second hearing within 90 days. So that will be the next thing. It's also required to have county planning board review. And the county reviews it to see whether adoption of the plan would have any county-wide implications. Usually they don't, although sometimes they come back with some good suggestions for improvement or sometimes other ideas that they have. The village and the town board can make edits as they feel are needed based on their review and based on what they have heard from their public hearing. They are also required to do an environmental review, or SEEKR, which stands for State Environmental Quality Review, and that's just a required piece, and that's done is like if we adopt this plan, will adoption of this plan have any adverse impacts on the environment? So that's why they have to do that. When all of those steps are done, and not before, they can adopt the plan by a resolution of the board. So there's quite a few steps. Once the village and the town board gets it, there's quite a few steps that they have to go through. And I know every time I do this, people say, can there be a referendum to adopt the plan? And the answer is no. There is no ability to have a referendum. The plan is legally adopted as a resolution of the board. And I would assume, although I don't know for sure, that the town and village would hold joint public hearings. I don't know, since it's a joint plan of the town and village, that seems to make sense. But each one of them would have to adopt the plan on their own. So the town will have to go through its process, and the village will have to go through its process, even though we share the SEEKR and the public hearing. So that's kind of a 101 on what's in the plan and how it came to be. And I'll turn it back over to Edie, and the committee and I can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to open it up for questions or comments.
The county planning board, who are they?
Our village and the town, our assigned county planner is a man by the name of Brad Bartley.
Okay.
And that, just to explain that a little more, is that state law requires a comprehensive plan to be reviewed by the county planning board. Some counties have staff, some counties have an actual board that they review it. So they review it to make sure that they identify any countywide implications of it. So that's just a kind of administrative thing we have to go through.
Who does the environmental review, the secret review?
The responsibility is the town and the village boards. They will be the lead, what's called the lead agency. They have to review it, but the paperwork and the discussion of what the potential environmental impacts were actually part of the contract that the town and village has with me. So I will develop a draft document for them, the paperwork that goes along with it, but it's the responsibility of the town and the village boards to evaluate it and go through it and draw their own conclusions about it.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm interested that you didn't highlight housing as one of the things that you thought were important to consider. I know it's in the plan and it's a specific thing here, but you didn't mention it. We had a conference, a workshop about 2 weeks ago on housing with Pine Plains and the media. And some of the anecdotal information that we got from the shareback comments, and I'd like to read one of them because I think it's really important, and I think it's important to emphasize it. There is, of course, a reference here to affordable housing for every income level or every resident. But this person, and I think that this is interesting to note, person suggested that affordable housing must address the systemic inequalities that suppresses marginalized and working class families. And there's a need to discuss more than revitalization, which more often than not leads to gentrification. I think that whole concept of what makes quality of life for the entire community is really important to stress, and I'd be interested in talking further about that and developing more of that sort of thrust in that direction.
Well, and I apologize if I didn't, in developing this slideshow, that I didn't adequately emphasize housing. It certainly was an important topic in the town, or in the committee. Many discussions about how it was among the most important and that you can't have a lot of the other things that we're trying to do without that. So maybe the lack of emphasis in this slideshow was just because I didn't pull it out enough. But I don't believe the plan has that attitude, and I think there are, I think we spent a lot of time talking about how important housing and affordable housing and addressing that very same thing was. So the slides might not reflect that, but I hope the plan does. It's got a whole section, a goal, and everything just related to housing. So I don't know, Ed, I know you've talked a lot about housing, so jump in.
Well, it's definitely a very important issue, and Sam knows well, and his point's well taken, but it's something that the committee has been aware of and has been discussing as an important element of the plan. And there are certain things that will need to be done in order to enable those sorts of things to happen that are going to be significant and important.
Well, one of the things about housing that you did cover that I thought was very interesting was when you talked about new projects being reviewed for the town, and part of that review would be set aside for affordable housing as part of the overall review of any new projects. I
Right.
thought that was a
Right, that's in
very
there.
important component.
And the other thing about, I mean, you probably heard that at the meeting that you were at, but the town, my opinion is that the town and village can only go so far. The whole affordable housing is bigger than what the town and the village can do. It's really a regional effort, like we wanted to set up a housing trust fund or any of those other mechanisms. The success of that will come from working with other towns in the region. So it's, and I think the plan articulates that some of getting at the housing issue is needing to work with way more than just the town and the village.
I didn't see the word tax anywhere here. Is there any consideration of how these plans affect taxes?
You mean in terms of whether it would increase or
Property
decrease taxes?
taxes?
I think I'm trying to remember from the public input that we got. I guess, you know,
Well, there's a concern of tax increases. In the survey, we actually had a question about sewers. You remember that? And everybody wanted them, but nobody wanted to pay for them. So, I mean, that was probably the most front and center addressing of taxes.
Can I say something?
Of course, please.
So one of the purposes of creating this comprehensive plan is that it also gives us a basis to go out and seek outside grant money. And so in doing that for things like the sewer, if we get this into place and it's a plan that people can look at and say, okay, that's logical, it makes sense, it's much more likely that we're going to be able to get money from federal government or the state government to implement it, and that we won't have to generate that money internally. So, it's not the case necessarily that we wrote, the goal of this is to keep taxes under control, but we always had in mind that if we did this right, that the money necessary to implement these things might be available from other sources.
Ken?
I'm a big fan of the Greenway guides, but a lot of the information in the Greenway guides was developed in the 90s. Do you know if there are updates to those guides?
They have added some new ones, they continue to add new ones. I'm not aware that they've gone back and updated any of their documents. I mean, I think while there's certainly new topics that could be added to it, I don't think that the policies and the direction that they establish are out of date though. I think they have a lot of really good information in them. They're still relevant today.
Tom?
How specific would you like comments to be on the current plan? I realize there is a public comment session coming up, in fact, two of them, suppose. Is this meeting about that or not?
This is an informational meeting, and the committee wants to hear your questions
Okay.
and your concerns.
Well, this is actually fairly general. It seems to me that the comprehensive plan doesn't take into very serious or sort of high priority consideration global warming, which is sometimes called climate change. In fact, the executive summary really doesn't mention it at all. The first time it appears in the plan is not until it's mentioned in threats, which the communities help generate, and that's page 22. I mean, it's not a certainty, but exactly how much climate change is going to affect any community, but it's certainly going to be significant, and particularly when you think in terms of an arc of 15 years, this place could look quite different in 15 years because of unchecked climate change. And in fact, given how it works, meaning a lot of the change is already built in to the climate system, nothing we do now will affect anything out of 15 or 20 years. So there's, it sort of falls into two general areas. One is how climate change is likely to affect specific physical things, And the other is what we as a community should be doing to try to slow down or prevent climate change. And I think there's a great deal more that could be done in both areas in the plan. And granted, this is a completely new thing. We weren't dealing with climate change in 1990, or in the early 90s when this first plan came out. We should have been, but the timing just wasn't quite right. But it you know, it affects everything from agriculture. The seasons are changing. The weather is becoming more violent, so pardon me, it's harder to grow, depend on crops. You know, whole season could get wiped out in a heavy rainstorm. Different kinds of vegetation is coming into the area. The trees we're looking at now are going to change in 15 to 20 years. They will be southern trees. The sort of the tree ecology will look more like Virginia than it does here. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Tourism. I know the town is probably going to increasingly depend on tourism for income. But what if it rains a lot more in 10 years? That means fewer tourists than you might be projecting. So this, I think it'd be worth spending some time looking through the plan and finding areas where.
Well, Sam, as Nan pointed out, this is going to end up being a document of both the town and the village. And certainly, climate change has become a priority issue with the CAC, which is now both village and town. And they are moving forward on it. It has become a priority. We certainly can put it into the executive summary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, that, no problems there.
And I think that one of the strategies was continue to support and help the climate smart efforts
Yes.
to be implemented. So, you know,
But
we
that's-
didn't really articulate a lot of what those were, because I think they're in the beginning stages of being figured out. But we can certainly adding it to the executive summary isn't to mention it, because it is certainly in the body of the plan.
Yes.
I have a question. In doing this work, and looking at the 1990s comprehensive plan, have there been any kind of things that the towns and villages have done that have been different, that have been significantly different, that were not part of the comprehensive plan? And also, does this comprehensive plan have any kind of significant changes in terms of the visions and goals than what was proposed in 1990s?
Nan, I'll let you, they're remarkably similar.
The vision and the goals.
Yes, remarkably. So we have a sense of self that is not radically changing. But certainly there are areas that need to be updated. You know, Tom's point about climate change wasn't even thought about in
And
the
affordable
1990s.
housing, I think, has more emphasis.
Yeah, so there's nuance, they're different, and just brand new things.
Yeah, things like inclusionary zoning, conservation subdivisions, those weren't really big topics back then. I think the difference between this plan and the 1990s plan is there were a lot of really good ideas in the 1990s plan that haven't been implemented, that needed to be fleshed out and detailed so that people know how to implement them. So you'll see many of the same general ideas, but more detailed and more action-oriented so people know what to do with it. Vague statements are hard for a community to figure out what to do with it. So we try to give the specific projects or actions that need to be done. So I think that's where there's a difference, a big difference in that level of specificity.
The roadmap has been made much more precise. Yes, Sonny?
I think, I'm not sure if it was in what I received in the email, sort of an outline of, but it did mention some sort of steering committee to stay on top of what's in there and make sure it's moving somewhere.
Right.
And is that in any of the projected?
Well, I briefly talked about other committees that need to be formed to move that on, but it's certainly discussed in the plan about the need to have that. You can't, like, I call it the collective sigh of relief when the plan is done and the community is like, we're glad we got through that. But then the real hard work starts after the plan is done. The planning, what we've done so far really is the easiest part. The harder part is to figure out how to make these real. So we've tried to emphasize and give tools for the town board and the planning, or the village board to know which actions they could take and should take, and with the help of the committee.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
Go
okay.
ahead.
I had it, but as far as the steering committee goes, I'm assuming that it's village and town. Would it be comprised of, government board members and members of the public? And the second part of that question is, in your work that you've done with other towns, what have you typically seen in a steering committee? Like how many people are generally on it? Does it vary?
It varies. I have found that they start off bigger than they end up. There's usually the effectiveness, the people that are actually doing a lot of the work that stick with a project are 7, 8, 9 people. Sometimes the committees start off as 15 or more, which is fine, but they aren't often able to be sustained at that level. But the committee should be reflecting the community, and I think we talk about it being broad-based to reflect elected officials, appointed officials, members of the community, businesses, and other stakeholders in the community should all have a role to play in these committees.
Right, so is there an optimum number that you've seen of people that, would make up an effective steering committee?
I will respond to that I don't think so. I think the right balance of people on a committee
Right.
is what makes it successful. And a commitment
Right.
by the committee members to stick with it.
And what process would you think would be the best for a community, the town and the village, to pick a steering committee?
Oh, that's going to be the responsibility of the elected officials.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
The plan is projecting forward this is a roadmap, as you describe it, for the next 10 or 15 years. And in 15 years, hopefully the town will be populated by people who are presently kids at Wichita School. And I was just wondering to what degree schools are mentioned or are not mentioned at all in the comprehensive plan as being a priority and economic opportunities for the kids who will be coming out of our schools.
This was something we debated at the very beginning because it's a serious concern for the community. There's no doubt about it. The reason we don't address it, other than state which schools are in our community, is that it's a completely separate form of government.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And so our elected officials can try to work with that government, but it's beyond the plan we're giving our elected officials.
But aren't our elected officials school board members as well?
Oh, go ahead, answer that.
Okay, I meant,
Okay.
they are,
Right.
but I was thinking this plan was made for the village and the town
Right.
boards. Those were the officials. Bill?
Yeah, so while we didn't address the specifics of the school district, we did talk quite a bit about education as being critical, not just primary and secondary education, but also ongoing education for all age groups. And so there is actually a lot of language in there that talks about the goal of our community as being one where everybody is always educating themselves to get to the next stage in their lives, their careers, what have you. So, if our aspirational goals are achieved, there would be a lot of places where you could learn different skills, you know, different life skills, different professional skills that would exist within this community, hopefully.
Yes.
And could that be something that if the population of the school goes down, conceivably you could use those facilities for those kinds of learning? Adult learning and continuing education and so
That
on.
would be up to the school district
Right,
to
but I mean,
decide,
that's
but many
something-
communities do
Right.
that. yeah.
But if the town and the village sort of got together and said, oh gee, you know, we'd like to see this here in our, that would be the process, would be to go to the school district and say, this is what we're thinking.
I'm sorry, you had.
Yeah, I'm curious how in-depth you went in terms of looking at current zoning, and did you do a build-out analysis of what the town and or the village would look like if every developable parcel was developed as per current zoning?
We did not do a build-out analysis, but we did do, which is in the, I think it's in appendix 2, not the reference document, what's called an audit. That was a very in-depth, line-by-line look at the zoning and subdivision laws. Once the goals and vision were set by the committee, then my team did a review of how likely is the zoning and the subdivision, if they were implemented, how close are they to meeting that vision and goals. And so there's very detailed audit of what could be improved. But we did not do the build-out analysis.
And how would you, since you're a consultant looking in at the town from the outside, and I'm new to the town, so I don't really know it that well, how would you characterize this town's feeling about development, generally speaking? Because different towns have different approaches to development. Some are very pro-development, and some town governments would love to see every developable lot developed so they can get their tax rateables up. Whereas other towns take a much more longer-term approach to economic development, saying, if we preserve our town and preserve our town's rural character, that will be more beneficial economically in the long run, as opposed to building out everything we can build out right away. So where do you think this town falls sort of in that spectrum?
Well, I think that there was a lot of discussion about the important role that the village has in being the center of the community in terms of economic development and higher density. And that was, I think that shows in the plan and the zoning and all of the other things. I think that there's the community, this is my impression from what I heard people say, is that there's a love of the rural character and the environment and a desire to maintain those. So I don't think it's a Wild West, let anything happen kind of community, but I don't think it's the kind of community that wants to shut out, put a gate and lock the key and shut it out either. I think it's kind of, I think for a rural community that has a lot of environmental resources, that wants to promote agriculture, and rural character with a village, I think it's kind of, got a good mix of that. So that's my impression. I didn't really see it as strong one way or the other.
Balance.
I think there's balance, and I think some of the techniques that the plan talks about could promote that balance. Relooking at the overlay district and making sure that is the way it should be. Relooking at things like conservation subdivisions and farm-friendly programs will do that balance.
Ed, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that question with a little bit of background. The original comprehensive planning that started in the town was in the early to mid-1970s, and was prompted by some efforts for large developments out in the rural areas. And so there's historically been this thinking since then of how do we balance the need to grow economically with the need to preserve a resource that's really important, which is the soils and landscape that's very important to us economically also. So that's something that's, the community has always been trying to balance for the last 45 years. So it's something it's very much aware of, and it's an ongoing conversation, but it's something you can be assured is part of what we think about as a community.
Yes.
So once the plan is approved, then the next step is also for the zoning board?
No, the next step, we've outlined a number of committees. And we realize that we have a finite resource in terms of people who have the time and the interest to serve on all these committees. But one of the suggestions, which I think will be most helpful, is describing what committees are intended to do and the responsibilities that volunteers, because it's all volunteer, are going to be involved, what's going to be involved. But the committee selection will be a function of the boards, not the school board, the town and the village board. And I think that many of them will balance. And have I answered your question? Or?
But the zoning changes.
Oh, zoning,
take
excuse me, yes.
place based on
Zoning,
the
zoning, one of the first set of committees, and this won't be joint because there are two separate zoning codes, is the appointment by the town and the village of the zoning review committees. Yes, and I'd say that's probably logically the first two committees that will be formed. Kathy, yeah.
Housing has always really been, foremost in my mind too, but is there much in-depth discussion about services?
Public services?
Public services.
There's, things like, you mean like sidewalk infrastructure?
No,
or-
I'm talking about grocery stores,
Oh,
clothing stores,
Right.
services, basic human services.
Well, it certainly came up in the survey information.
yeah, I don't know, we don't have a section pulled out just for that. I think that was kind of in the mix of
Concerns.
concerns, right. Right, I mean, we do have, in the appendix 2, we talk about the emergency services, the fire and ambulance and what those are. We talk, there's a description, medical clinics in the hospital over in Sharon, and so to pull out whether there's a need for, there were some comments about a grocery store
Yes.
in the survey. But in terms of that being a big topic that we address specifically, we need X, Y, and Z. I don't think it got that specific.
Yeah, I only ask that because I know in the past 2 days, I've had somebody ask me about food, and today somebody asked me about clothing. So I know it's something that's desperately needed here.
Right.
Yeah, I think in part one, there is some language talking about the need for practical retail already as opposed to.
That's right.
But how you get there is another question.
Yeah.
It seems that every time, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment that every time a store empties out, we get another antique store in town. And I'm with you, we need a cheap, not cheap, but reasonable clothing store and a supermarket that actually has food in it and not empty shelves.
Ed, did you want to comment?
Yeah, it sort of, it raises, these comments have raised a question I think that the committee has wrestled with, and that is, given the nature of this community, a rural community in the area where we live, and given the nature of commerce and the change in the nature of commerce, what should we be anticipating will be the kind of commerce that will come here? A specific example, clothing store. To what extent is how you shop for things changing?
Right.
And to what extent does that impact what it's realistic to anticipate you should look for in terms of businesses to come to your community? And I just pose it as a question. It's something that we've kind of wrestled with, and it's not found an easy question to answer. So I'd just be interested in what people think about that.
I'd like to make a comment that one thing that you can consider is that a lot of people have been shopping online. A lot of people order food and they order all kinds of household goods on a daily basis through the post office. And our post office and, well, the United States Postal Service, they're delivering this stuff every day. I know for a fact, my partner works for the post office, and he delivers probably hundreds of packages every day on his route. So you have to, I think an intelligent way to look at it is to look at how people are shopping, so, you know, to sort of figure out like what we're actually going to need as far as brick and mortar, because people are changing the way they're doing things.
Andrew?
Along these lines of what Mr. Kennan was saying, so if the kids from Weebutuck are going to be here 10 to 15 years from now, is there any language in the comprehensive plan as to make sure the town has something to offer those kids so they do stay here? Because if those kids don't come here, then if there's no one who wants to live in this town.
Yeah, and the economic development section talks about the need to grow jobs and expand beyond just, you know, a couple of the bricks and mortar stores. So I think that that is included in the broader economic development that, you know, you're right, it needs to be a place that people have reason to live here for. So I think that's covered in that economic development section.
Meg?
So in turn, from what you're saying, I'm thinking that this is also a tool for future investors or entrepreneurs to look at this plan to say, hey, there's a need in this community, or there's a desire for these type of services, maybe I can open my business there. Like giving sort of.
Absolutely, I think the plan can and should be a really important part of the marketing of the community, absolutely.
And one of the important trade-offs is being sure that the flexibility is there to allow somebody with an idea that we hadn't anticipated to come in and be able to implement it without just, you know, saying everything goes, right? So, you know, one thing is you could just take the zoning code and say, you can build any sort of anything anywhere, and then anyone can come and do it, but that's not a good way to preserve what we have. On the other hand, if you get too tight, then people can't bring in new innovative ideas, so there has to be this kind of a flexibility to hear new ideas and then adapt them.
And the idea is to make it somewhat of a living document, the town hall, and not just a joint board meeting, but a town hall meeting, to talk about the accomplishments of the year and to hear different, should we tweak or should the governments be paying more attention to this as opposed to that, given the circumstances of what have happened.
One thing that made me think that there's one requirement in the New York State law for a comprehensive plan, and that's where you have to state when you will update the plan. So the action plan talks about, and I forget if we put 7 years?
No,
10 years. So, you know, every community has a little different outlook on that, but the town and the village shouldn't be shy to, as conditions might change in the community, you can update the plan whenever you need to. And that should be just your way of looking at it. It's not something that's static. You had something in the back.
I sort of want to talk to Ed about this. Now everybody goes and shops on Amazon. There's a population here that would love to have Sapersteins back, for example. A large population, I would guess, I know, and they would like to have a supermarket that is reasonable and full, which doesn't exist in this town, and basic food and clothes that you can buy like Sapersteins. We don't have that. We have now, moving into Sapersteins, Hunter B, which is an antique store. And if you're talking about economics, in terms of having a place where young people can get a job, they're not going to be getting it at Hunter B's. They're going to be getting it at Sapersteins or at some other clothing store. And we don't have that here. This town seems to me like it's set up for visitors, not for the people that live in it. The older people that live in it, the younger people that will be living in it, and that's, for me, a grave concern.
I totally agree with you. On the other side, the role of government is also to set up these roadmaps for citizens and the public to engage in business. So, as you said, marketing is very important, and also to show these needs and wants to people who have the money, have the interest to start businesses. And without that, you know, we can't start a town grocery store. We need someone to come here to invest. And as long as they know this, we need to convey it to people and to the community.
I would just say, having been involved in the current plan, I really tried to push zoning, updating zoning, and we never got around to it. It wasn't done in all these years. So I would just hope that when this plan is done, when it's adopted, that the next step be updating our zoning and a real push on it, and not 5, 10 years, you know. Right.
As I said in the grant application, this comprehensive plan is the precursor to revising zoning.
We said that in the 90s too.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry, John, you had wanted to
Yeah, I
say something.
think one thing that we all have to realize that it's a very good idea to have a business here with products that are needed and used by the local people, but we have to, the village is not going to own a grocery store, or the village is not gonna own Saperstein's. Mr. Saperstein was here for years, was very successful, but I spoke to him just before he left. He thought it was time for him to retire. He would have liked to have somebody purchase his store that would have continued it in the manner that he ran it. But unfortunately, he sold it to who came forward to purchase it. I mean, we have to realize that people are in business to make money. And there has to be an interest where a business is gonna come in here and feel that they are going to make a profit. We have a situation now that a furniture store that was here for years is now out of business. The people that run it, excuse me, got to retirement age, and is another furniture store gonna come in, or is it gonna be an antique store, or is it gonna be vacant? A lot of people miss the McDonald's for reasonably priced food, but for some reason, no franchise has seen fit to take that over. It's been vacant now for close to a year. But I think we have to realize that what happens in town or with businesses depends on entrepreneur type people thinking that they can make a decent living here in Millerton. I mean, the rail trail is a great influence to get people into town. Now, how much money that the people that utilize the rail trail spend in town, I don't know. You'd have to ask some of the merchants around that do that. But I think that's the important thing, that the town and village boards have to be receptive when these people come around, and give them a chance to make a living, and if they make a reasonable living, they'll stay. If they don't, they'll move on.
And I think going off of that, like, sometimes, like, you know, I feel like the town and village boards are not receptive to change places, and, you know, maybe I'm not on a personal level either, but there are a lot of people in this community who are. There are a lot of people who would like to have a McDonald's or a hamburger. I'm not one of those people, but I respect that that's the want and desire in this community, and we're not listening enough to people who maybe don't have the means to own their own business or frequent the shops on Main Street. And where's that happy medium? Where do we find that happy medium where we could be like Red Hook and have a Hannaford and a really nice Main Street that's kind of rustic? Like, I feel like we could do that here. We just need to have the right groups of people
And then it comes also from having, the design standards. You know, I think that there's a lot of communities that don't like the franchises because of the way they look, not because of who they are. So the design standards, that you can be assured that the things that you value are maintained, are really important when it comes to that question.
And I've lived in Maine and I totally agree with you. I mean, there's communities like Freeport where you wouldn't even know the McDonald's is in a
Right.
little Victorian
Right.
building, and, you know, there's so much anger against the Dunkin' Donuts in this town, and honestly, that's the cornerstone of many small towns now. It was one of my first jobs as a young person, so I think we need to also be open-minded and maybe use architectural suggestions.
Right, that's where it goes back to the successful places clearly articulate what their performance expectations for development in the community is. And then on the flip side, say, if you meet those expectations, it's a welcoming yes. Instead of communities who put up barriers. So yes, I think you can do that. Absolutely, you can do that. And the fear, I know, because a lot of places I go, the fear is the Dunkin' Donuts comes in and it's built in a way that doesn't reflect the community, and then people are upset about that, rightly so. And I think the plan clearly articulates the role of community character and rural character in the landscape here, so that should flow through your zoning and your other regulations to try and find that balance.
I think one thing that and I've heard numerous people mention just what you did about the Dunkin' Donuts. I think there's a situation there, I'm not on the planning board, I'm not on the zoning board, but I think there's a situation there where there is a problem with the current owner of that piece of property, and I think it's in like litigation. So I don't think we can blame the town or the planning board or anything for the lack of Dunkin' Donuts being a reality. I think there's some major legal problems with that property.
If that property's been sold, that is.
It's been sold. Mimi?
I think, I wanted to lay out, the reason I think that I was a part of this committee is I felt like I was a part of designing, part of the infrastructure that we don't yet have and that we need to attract the businesses that everyone is saying we want. So I think there's a lot of conflict still in Millerton. I do real estate here. I could have sold Saperstein's at least 10 times to different people, but it shares a septic. And that's a really big problem, and not a lot of people are willing to take a chance on a building that shares a septic with 2 other businesses in town. We need a sewer. That, I hope we get that across clearly, that that's our main priority. We need a sewer system in Millerton. So to facilitate like where Red Hook or Rhinebeck have this nice setup where it's a mix, they, I'm assuming, both have sewage systems.
Right.
We really need that. And we really need to update our zoning. There's a lot of empty buildings and there's a lot of buildings that are zoned just for residential that could be used for residential and commercial quite nicely and easily without ruining anyone's life around them. And we haven't addressed those things in years. So I'm hoping that we get that part across to the planning and zoning boards so that those changes happen. Because without them, we can't grow. We can't grow even by a little bit. I don't want our town to look like Poughkeepsie or anything like that, but I do think we need a few more elements and categories of businesses that we can't really have yet because of the infrastructure that isn't there.
Well put.
Well put. Sewer is the main thing that we need.
Yeah, that prevents growth.
Right.
In any way.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.